Hi, everybody. Welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace. I'm Vince Mickens with the Private Air Media Group. I have the most unique show that I've done in a couple of years in terms of aviation, and I'm really excited about it. Had a great conversation at EAA Air Venture at Oshkosh, and from that point, I was determined that I was going to pull some balloonists together, if you can call, I guess I can call you guys that.
Yes.
Pull some balloonists together and talk about every aspect of it. And what's really cool about what we're going to be able to do today is that I have an actual manufacturer and maker of balloons who has his own company and has been in the ballooning industry for a very long time from all aspects, et cetera, and so forth, including his involvement with the FAA and regulations and safety, et cetera, and so forth. So it's really going to be a very informative show. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get started with introductions. And I'd like to start out by introducing John Tarpley Head, better known as Tarp, as I found out. Tarp, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you and looking forward to picking your brain about all things that have to do with ballooning.
Thank you for putting this on. It's always good to have more information about ballooning out there.
Absolutely. And then the gentleman that I met at Oshkosh and met him along with his wife, Mitch Loiselle. Mitch, it was really great. We must have talked for at least a half hour or more. Once you told me you were into ballooning, I didn't really want to talk about anything else. I just wanted to know what it was all about because, I've always had a fascination with it. I've been a pilot for a long time, but it's one of those kind of, I don't want to use the quote unquote bucket list term, but it's been there, something that I've always been interested in doing. So it's really great. I actually think too, though, that it's really great to present this to the up and coming generation as, hey, here's something else that if you haven't experienced it, you may want to, and actually you can make a career of it, whether it's on the manufacturing side or on the flying side, in terms of commercial ballooning, et cetera, which we'll talk all about. And I get to meet your son for the first time today, James Loiselle. And James is actually a student pilot for hot air ballooning. So, and found out that he's starting to get his two boys involved in it. So and we'll talk about that family history that goes way back and everything and the history for head balloons and how that all started with Tarp. So, let's go ahead and get things going and just talk about it. And Mitch, I'm going to let you kind of open up and just tell us a little bit about your involvement with ballooning and why you're so passionate about it, why it's such a great aspect of aviation.
Well, my first balloon ride was a free one back in 1989. It's always a good way to start, I guess. I had a friend that had a balloon, and I was at the time in the auto parts industry and was looking for opportunities for an advertising source. So we were looking at possibly building a balloon with our company name on it to use for promotional opportunities. So this friend of mine who was a balloonist took me out for a balloon ride, and I pretty well got hooked then. I started then attending some balloon festivals, and you can contact festivals and they're always looking for volunteer crew. And that's what I did for the first couple of years throughout the Northeast. I lived in Vermont at the time, so I would go up into Canada to a couple of events. Down into New York and New Jersey, and I eventually met a good friend from Tampa, Florida, Ron Martin, who was flying a special shape balloon, Ogie the Friendly Dragon, big giant dragon balloon, and I started crewing for him regularly whenever he was in with a reasonable driving distance of 5 or 6 states, and that really got me hooked.
Halfway across the country, but
halfway across the country, right? And so I was in New Jersey at a festival there with him, and we were chatting, and there was a gentleman from the FAA FSDO in Allentown, I believe, standing there in the conversation, and someone asked me, I said, well, how come you're not a pilot? And I said, well, I started fixed wing way back in the 70s, but I just haven't gotten around to it. And I had flown at that point many times and gotten some burner time from flying with Ron and some other people. And Ron said, well, you need to get a pilot student certificate. And the guy from the FAA said, hey, I've got some in my briefcase. Ron, go get it. So I got my student certificate standing on the field in Reddington, New Jersey, and took my first official balloon student pilot lesson, if you will, in Ogie the Friendly Dragon, and kind of went on from there. I bought a used balloon through someone that I tripped across in New York that needed a lot of repair work and resurrection. And we were blessed and still are blessed in Vermont to have a really good balloon repair station. And Paul Stumpf surveyed the aircraft with me, and we spent several hours picking through and decided we could get this thing in the air. So for about $3,000, I started out with my first learning balloon, and we kind of moved up from there. And then I was fortunate enough to have Tarp build me a really nice red, white, and blue balloon. There's a picture of it behind me here.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Called Freedom, and he built that for me in 2006.
So what comparing the size to the red, white, and blue balloon that you have now, what size was the learning balloon, as you called it?
So it was a 77,000 cubic foot balloon.
Okay.
And
about
Freedom,
3/4 of the size of what you fly now.
Right. Correct. Freedom's 105,000. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing, there's so much to cover, but you touched on something that I think I would imagine crewing is a great way to kind of introduce yourself to ballooning, and getting to know the process and watching others do it and things like that. Yes.
It is, absolutely. Ballooning is probably the most social form of aviation that I've ever encountered. From
what, more than we pilots fixed wing and helicopters?
Oh yeah, well, for one thing, wherever we land, we get to do the champagne toast to celebrate the flight. So that helps. So volunteer crew. We have some crew that they just want to crew. They don't even care about flying, and that's one of the things that we try to offer is crew with us, help us out, and when we can, we'll get you in the basket, get you a ride. But we have crew that they just think it's a hoot to just do the chase. They think it's neat to go cross country and try to figure out, okay, you're going to the northwest and there aren't any roads that way. We've got to go west first, then north, and figure out how to get to you. So yeah. They kind of take that on as that's a cool challenge, and then we get the others that really are interested. I think James has a friend in Kalamazoo that I think Rick could get hooked on becoming a student pilot in the not distant future, so.
Speaking of getting hooked on it, Rick, how about you tell us about when and how you got hooked on it, having all of this aviation and ballooning in your family?
Well, I think primarily I started to get hooked on it just chasing Dad around, and Dad mentioned.
Why do I believe that?
I was, early 90s. I was probably 12 years old when we first got into it. I probably started following around to the different festivals when I was 12 years old, and just had a ton of fun. And like Dad mentioned, the thrill of the chase was kind of my thing, and I blame that for taking so long to get my student pilot's license, just because I enjoyed crewing so much. I would go out and kind of make it my goal to try to get ahead of the balloon just far enough to let them pass over the top of the vehicle. And then I'd scoot up a little further and, get in their path again and have them pass over the top of the vehicle. And that was kind of the game that I used to play. And back when I started, we didn't use GPS or Glimpse or any of these special apps. We used a county map and a compass and just kind of hope for the best.
Old-fashioned navigation. But yep. What was the turning point that you said, okay, crewing is wonderful, but I need to learn how to fly this baby?
I think my kids kind of pushed me along a little bit there. I took my first flight in 2001 with Ron Martin, our good friend out of Tampa, Florida. And I ironically went on to buy his balloon that I took my first ride in many years later. And unfortunately, we were never able to get that airworthy. That's a whole story for another time. But that's how I wound up purchasing the balloon from Tarp, is we weren't able to make that work. But the big pivotal moment there was when Ryan took his first flight and logged his first hours at 12 years old. And we just had a ball. We were up there with Dad and the whole family was up there. We've got a great family photo of all the boys together playing in the balloon, we just say, yeah, are you looking for it there?
Oh, no. No, I'm actually looking for a note to remind me of something else.
But no, that was just that was kind of the pivotal moment there. And we said, okay, we need to jumpstart this a little bit. So I bought my first system a few years back from Ron Martin, and it was a complete system, Aerostar. It was a 1986. Can't remember the model, but it was a little tired, and unfortunately, it gotten some ants in the envelope when it was stored last. And ants inside an envelope wreak havoc. They basically, the acidity from their body just eats through the fabric. And it when we inflated the balloon and looked up, it looked like stars in the sky above us. And you never really want to see that. So I needed a nice clean envelope. So Dad was calling around asking Tarp about one that I had found in Vermont and was interested in pursuing. And Tarp says, "Well, I happen to have one right here that I'm rebuilding." So so we worked out the deal and we were able to get that going. Yep,
yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah. So Tarp, now that we've been talking about you, you have a really, really unique story though, in terms of your start with ballooning, and really, I think it was very interesting to me, talking about tethering a balloon to promote the rebirth of the town Helen, Georgia. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Helen was an old lumber town in the 1900s, and in late '69, some of the local businessmen got together because the town was basically drying up. It was a small little town, a couple hundred people, but they were moving away. There were no jobs. And someone came up with the idea of building a German village in the North Georgia mountains. And a local artist named John Colick actually is who came up with it. And he drew some sketches as to what the town could look like if they put fake roofs and fake facades on the front of the existing buildings and make it look Bavarian. And all the shop owners and store owners are like, okay, we can do that. And everyone took money from their own pockets, rebuilt their buildings. And now we have the longest running Oktoberfest in the country and all the celebrations. And we're probably one of the biggest tourist attractions in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So where does ballooning come in with all of this?
One of the promoters behind it was sitting looking at a book of pictures from Switzerland, Austria, and trying to get an idea of, okay, I've got to build a new building on what I want it to look like on the front. And he's looking at this picture and he's like, there's a balloon flying over the Alps. It was a gas balloon, but it was still a balloon. And he's like, we need one of those if they're flying them over there. So he got on the phone and found a fellow in California named Don Picard, who has a long history in ballooning. And Don sold him a balloon, and I started hanging out with it. It was a cousin of mine. Started hanging out with him, learning to inflate the balloon and tether the balloon and sew it when we taught myself to sew, to repair it when we tear it up. And it's just grown from that fascination of promoting Helen to building my own balloon for myself, to building and repairing them for others.
So yeah, you started doing it first for yourself, and then it just kind of blossomed into a business.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool. So now I take it you build all types of balloons for different folks. Tell us a little bit about the process of building a balloon.
Well, you've got different components that go into it. The balloon envelope, the big balloon. Average balloon probably uses about 1,300 square yards of nylon fabric and a couple of miles of thread. It takes us about a week to cut one out and about a month to sew one together.
How many people to cut it? How many people to sew it? Things like that.
Two people to cut, 2 to 4 to sew. Just depends on where we're at, what stage we're at in sewing. But it's very labor intensive. There's 400 roughly separate pieces of fabric that go into it, and there's not a lot of it that's the same shape. So you've got to be sure you map it out correctly and everything is sewn together in the correct space. But yeah, it's just really labor intensive for the balloon. And Then the basket is woven from rattan, like rattan furniture.
Right.
It's a trailing vine that grows in the jungles in Southeast Asia. And we have to soak it in water and then weave it around a frame to get the basket shape that we want. The burners, we've been stainless steel tubing, a little bit of welding involved, a lot of plumbing involved as far as routing the propane into the burner. So we build every aspect of it.
Yeah. So where do you get the people that, what kind of expertise do some of your employees have to do this? I mean, you talked about sewing, but you're also talking about plumbing, welding, et cetera. So do you have all of these people have this type of expertise?
No, everyone's has their own expertise. And we've gathered together mostly a lot of people that are crafty, hands-on type of people that are craftsmen that
Okay.
that work with their hands really well and can produce, fine product, handmade. Because almost everything we do is one-off, handmade, essentially.
Yeah. What do you, in terms of the material, do you have different kinds of material, or have you found a material that's got the best strength, but it's light and, all of those kind of things, and the thread and things like that? Not to dig too deep into it,
Yeah.
but just trying to give our viewers and listeners an idea of what it entails.
We're using a lightweight nylon. It weighs about 2 ounces per square yard, has a coating on it to keep the air from passing through the fabric so it will fly better. We use a silicone coating, and we also use a polyurethane coating on different fabrics. We've got lighter weight fabrics for specialty balloons. We've got heavier weight fabric for other types of specialty balloons, but the main fabric is about the same weight as say a backpack or a tent that you would use for backpacking.
Okay. Yeah. And you also spend a lot of time flying hot air balloons.
I do. I travel to a lot of festivals, just demonstrating the product and trying to get people interested in ballooning and make contacts and hopefully sell a few along the way.
Yeah. So one of the biggest festivals on the planet is coming up, and that's in Albuquerque. We were just talking about that in pre-show, and I understand that there's probably going to be over 700 balloons there. I also thought it was fascinating that they're actually having to turn balloonists down because they just don't have the room for it. So that's pretty spectacular, and that show has quite a history. Can you guys talk about that a little bit and your experiences with it, starting with you, Tarp, and then Mitch and James can chime in.
Well, I've seen the event grow tremendously. This will be my 48th. It's their 50th anniversary, and it'll be my 48th event there.
Wow. So
I've been going for a while. I've seen it go from a dirt field in the desert to they've got a nice green launch field for us now. It's grown from just kind of a thrown together, a bunch of good old boys get together with their balloons into a highly oiled machine right now that runs a fantastic event.
Yeah. How many people does it take to crew on the average a balloon? And what are the different gondolas? What are the different sizes in terms of what's the largest, what's the smallest, things like that?
You can crew with one person, but it's much nicer to have 10 or 20 sometimes. It depends on the balloon. There's some of the balloons are one-person balloons. It's baskets just big enough for them, or some of them even have parachute harnesses that they fly underneath a small balloon envelope. There's ride balloons that'll hold 20 to 30 passengers.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Mitch, you're a commercial balloon pilot or commercial lighter than air. So that means that you can fly for hire, if I'm not mistaken, if I know my rules in the FAA. So tell us your perspective about that and your experiences with things like the upcoming Albuquerque Festival.
Well, correct. I am a commercial balloonist. My rating is actually lighter than air. with airborne heater, which requires me to be able to fly a balloon that has a propane system and a burner to add heat. If I ever were to pursue the gas balloon rating, then they would drop that restriction, the airborne heater. So this year will be my second year going out to Albuquerque. My friend Ron talked me into going because he sold James his balloon and then decided he wanted to go again. So he called me up and said, "Where's your balloon? You want to go to Albuquerque?" And that was last year. And so we're
like you were going to say no, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's like, I can do that. So commercial ballooning is, I do it on a low scale. We're fortunate enough to be able to do enough flights to kind of offset some of the insurance costs and the operating costs and the annual inspection expenses and things like that we incur, like any other aircraft owner would do. So it's nice to be able to do a little bit of side work, if you will, but just enough. There are guys that make it a vocation. We have a good friend in Vermont who flies. He has 3 different balloons, depending on how many people he has to fly. He takes the different size balloon out, and it's his job. He does it seasonally because Vermont, we do fly in the wintertime. It's fun to fly in the wintertime, but it's not fun for passengers to fly in the wintertime necessarily, but there's a lot of these balloonists, they'll fly, 150, 200 days a year, and so they're really doing a lot of work. I think an average private balloonist like James will be for a while till he gets his commercial. If he gets 30 flights in a year, that might be an average. I used to, when we were fairly busy having a lot of fun and fun flying, I've done as many as 65 or so in a season. Now that's seasonal in Vermont, June to October, so.
Got you. So what would you recommend for people that are interested in ballooning, but never really gave it, a whole lot of thought? I hate to say it that way, but people don't every day think about, oh, I want to go hot air ballooning. But really what I'm talking about, a lot of our viewers and listeners are either in an aviation program or they recently graduated from one. They may be on track to be an airline pilot or a corporate pilot or, charter, whatever the case may be. Or they may be making a shift and say, maybe I want to do something else. So if somebody wants to get into the commercial aspect of hot air ballooning, what kind of advice would you give for that?
Well, the old saying in ballooning is, if you want to make $1 million in ballooning, start out with 2. And
so, and that's not $2.
Yeah. But if they've got some aviation background and they're interested in exploring ballooning, again, you go to a festival, maybe just to observe the first few times. Many festivals allow people to walk on the launch field, some do not, but go there, talk to some balloonists. If you enjoyed that, the next festival, contact the festival well in advance and say, hey, you have opportunities for crew, and get signed up for crew and get assigned with and meet some balloonists. Find a local balloonist in your area. There's not a ton of us all over the place, but we're kind of hidden in neat places, and find somebody that you can hook up with and say, hey, I hear you got a balloon, and I wonder if you need some crew once in a while, and get on their list. And I used to do an email blast saying, hey, we're looking at flying on Saturday morning, and if you can go, just reply directly, don't reply to all, and let me know, and we'll see at this meeting place at 6 a.m. And James does the same type thing. He does it via text now, a little more sophisticated,
well, he's just showing us up in our age, but that's okay. You can do that. No, speaking of James, how about you, your perspective? I mean, you have a couple of boys, and you've crewed for a long time. You've been surrounded and immersed in hot air ballooning, but you've recently started pursuing it in terms of flying them. So what would you recommend, along with what your dad said, for people that want to get involved in it, whether they want to do it as a possible profession or just want to start learning to fly a balloon?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of common misconceptions there. If you do want to fly, there's a big concern about heights, right? First, I'm just going to throw it out there. I'm afraid of heights, and so Dad always says it's not really the being afraid of heights; it's afraid of edges. And an example of that would be, I stayed in a hotel down in Austin, Texas, a few years back on the 5th floor, and they had one of these clear railings, right? And you could look down into the lobby. And I never hugged a wall more trying to get to my room than in that hotel.
You did not go and lean against the rail.
Absolutely not. No, that's not for me.
When I tell people I'm afraid of heights, they just look at me like that doesn't make sense. But okay.
Yeah,
Dad has it right. He hit the nail on the head, though.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'd never heard that until actually he said it to somebody this year, and I was like, that's really insightful. I've never thought of that.
Absolutely.
So I took my first flight, to give you another example, in 2001 with our friend Ron Martin down at the Sun and Fun Festival down in Tampa, Florida, and I didn't even realize we had left the ground. I was just so involved in looking at all these beautiful planes that were coming in for the show, and we were doing a media flight the Friday morning of the show, I believe it was, and we left the ground, and I didn't even realize I was listening to the burner, but he had been doing that, and I looked down and we were like 30 feet off the ground, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me, and it's just such a smooth, beautiful ride.
Sure.
So anybody that's afraid of heights, I would say, don't let that hold you back. And if you're interested in ballooning and you see a balloon fly over, chase us down. We don't go that fast. We're pretty easy to keep up with. And we're all pretty laid back people. And we, for the most part, I think every balloonist, correct me if I'm wrong, Tarp, you've been doing this for a lot longer than I have, but every balloonist is trying to get people into the sport, and we just love doing it. We love sharing it with other people. Where I'm at right now, I've soloed, and I can only fly alone at this point until I go through the rest of my testing. And this has got to be the most boring part of it, just because I have nobody to share it with. I love flying just the same. But it's just, there's something about being able to share it with somebody, bring them up for their first experience and have them out there. And we just love to get people involved. If you don't know of a balloonist in your area or don't see any flying over, BFA.net is the Balloon Federation of America's website. And you can find a listing of pilots and crew in your area and just reach out to them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought the Balloon Federation of America. I was going to bring that up in a little bit, but since we're talking about it, you guys are members. Tarp, you've sat on the board for, I think, a couple of times, if I'm not correct. So can you tell us a little bit about how important that association is for the industry?
Well, every industry has to have a voice, and the BFA is the voice of ballooning in the United States. They're the National Aero Club for ballooning. They're the NAA ballooning division is the BFA, and so to speak to the FAA, the FAA wants someone who's representing a broad spectrum of the aviation population. So the BFA has a government liaison committee to discuss governmental affairs. They have a landowner group to discuss problems around the country with landowners. They help to put on safety seminars. It's just one of their goals is to promote ballooning, and they do I think a very good job of what one of their directives is.
Yeah, so landowning is I've noticed that's something that's kind of stands out a bit, and I guess it's because balloons can, based on the weather conditions, the wind, can end up landing anywhere, and maybe sometimes that can be an issue. I'm asking.
Oh, yeah. Tarp, do you want to jump in? You want me to? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay, so yes, landowners are very valuable to us, because without them and without them being friendly, we don't have places to land. We always try and hope that the chase crew can get to our landing area, at about the same time we do, if not a little ahead of it. We've been able to radio ahead and say, hey, look, we're looking at this, farm with the 3 blue silos and the green house out front. They'll scoot up and knock on the door and ask if we can land. Sometimes we, have to kind of make a decision like we're going to land here, and we'll touch down, ask the landowner if they're okay with it. I would say that, most often, like up in the high 90%, 98, 99% of the time, people are pretty cool with it. We're very careful to not land in crops. Things like that. More people are excited to come out and see the balloon. If we have an opportunity, I've landed on cul-de-sacs and neighborhoods, where all the kids come out, and we've decided to just tie off the balloon to tether ropes and give all the kids in the whole neighborhood balloon rides until we run out of fuel, and so we try to do goodwill stuff like that. Once in a while, you get somebody that just doesn't, they're just not real thrilled about it. And if you have the opportunity to fly on, we will. Sometimes you don't have that choice. If it's a morning flight and the winds are coming up in the morning, you just have to kind of, beg for forgiveness and say, gee, here's why we landed, and most in every situation I've come across, we've always been able to have, leave the landowner happy and smiling and welcoming us back. And we always ask them to join in our celebration of our flight, and things. But landowners are very important as much as the crew, and because a balloonist without crew is a hitchhiker, so the crew's got to get there too, but.
Yeah, exactly. James, Mitch, could you and Tarp talk a little bit about, I want to go technical again, about the burner systems? You have single burners, you have dual burners, and how that, just give it kind of an overview of how that works. I think, James, you were talking about people being scared of heights. I think some people wonder, how do you keep from burning up a balloon when you're shooting flames up in it to warm the air? So just like to give a little bit more of a comfort level, probably for me too.
Tarp, I'll let you start on that one.
Okay. Well, first, the mouth of the balloon, the bottom of the balloon, is about 12 feet in diameter. So it's a big hole that you're directing the burner into. The burner has a fairly concentrated flame pattern, the way it's designed. So as long as you're pointing the burner into the center of the hole, you're fine. Now, if you're not paying attention to what you're doing and you've got the burner tilted to one side or the other, then yeah, you could burn a hole in the balloon. It's not going to be anything catastrophic. You've melted.
Is the balloon material fireproof by chance? Fire resistant?
The bottom part of the balloon is made from Nomex.
Okay.
Which is what your race drivers, your fighter pilots, firemen all wear. Nomex clothing. It's a fire retardant material. So it will help alleviate any major damage if you hit it with the fire. But, if you continue burning on it for a long enough period, you can burn a hole through it. But you really have to not be paying attention to what you're doing to burn one.
Yeah. Are there a couple of burner manufacturers that's their specialty in making different types of burners? Or
no, each manufacturer of balloons has their own unique design, and they're all made in-house.
So that would include you?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. That's so that brings me to the other question I was going to come to you on for young people that are maybe interested in learning more on the manufacturing side. Say they're handy, they're craftsmen types, and they would be interested in that aspect of the aviation industry. What would you recommend to them?
Come go to work for me.
Bingo.
I'm serious. There's only probably 4 active balloon manufacturers in the U.S. Type certified. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of spread out, but I mean, you could go do training at a manufacturer. There's a lot more balloon repair stations, and was said earlier, you're always trying to involve new people, whether it's crewing, whether it's flying, repairing balloons. There's a lot of graying of A&P mechanics in general in aviation. So same is going on with ballooning, balloon repair stations. So it's nice to share your knowledge with someone that's young and interested in ballooning. So talk to any of the local repair stations and come get some hands-on experience.
Sure. And so for something like making burners, I guess somebody that's an A&P, they could transition to that pretty nicely.
Yeah, to some extent. It's a little bit more involved just because the bending of the tubing and
okay.
But there's a little bit more involved there than a normal A&P would have. But yeah, if they're building an airplane from scratch to where they're making the brake lines, the fuel lines, just every part of one, then there's a lot of that's going to transition over into working and building and repairing balloons.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Mitch, let's talk about flying a balloon and how the techniques with the burner, steering, etc.
Okay. Well, the burner, it's pretty simple. Add heat, you go up, let it cool off, it comes back down. And we have a vent at the
Boy,
top.
that sounds complicated. No,
Yeah. So the very top of the balloon is a parachute, and it looks like a parachute laid out if you were to take it out of the system. But it fills the hole in the very top of the balloon. And if we need to, we can pull a vent line and we can bleed off some hot air out of the balloon so we can descend faster. So basically we have control up and down. Now the winds aloft blow at different directions at different speeds, and sometimes it's pretty dramatic. And we talked earlier about doing a launch in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and on the surface it was dead calm. I mean, it was absolutely calm. We didn't think we were going to go anywhere until we cleared the treetops, and we were suddenly doing 9 miles an hour to the west. And jumped up to 1,500 feet and stalled to nothing and decided that was boring. So we went back down closer to the surface, picked up some winds, flew out about 6 miles, and then jumped up to 6,200 feet and picked up some winds coming out of the west, going back east. And we were traveling along about 22 miles an hour. And that brought us back over the launch field that we originally started from. So
is that all by feel? In other words, when you're, for example, ascending to find the wind that you're looking for, do you just do that until you start moving, and then you're like, okay, yeah, this is the direction we want to go, and this is the wind we're looking for, and then basically level off at that point?
Pretty much. And you try to keep in the back of your mind that, okay, we were at 800 feet and we were flying a heading of 270. And then at 1,200 feet, we were flying 300. So you try to keep that in the back of your mind, thinking that, geez, if I'm flying 300, I want to go back more to the west, and we're going to descend down to that level and try to pick up that wind again. Now that wind isn't always necessarily there, it's a little bit of a game, so you try to keep that in mind. There's some websites. There's one that's very good that we go to, and we look at winds aloft, and it's broken down at like levels of like 97 feet and 200 feet and 400 feet, so we can get an idea of what the winds are doing. Speed.
What website is that, if I could ask?
It's Ryan Carlton.
Okay.
And it's easy to Google. So we refer to that, and we look at, I look at about 4 different websites to get information, in addition to calling flight service for a pilot briefing to get, the hands-on weather from the FAA. So we do that. And then, if you're flying, there's a lot of competition balloons, when they're competing, like at Albuquerque, they'll have a competition, and these guys are, a lot more agile, I guess was a good word, at working the winds and things. I've flown with I carry popcorn with me because it's friendly to the environment, and you can drop a kernel of popcorn over and watch it below you, and all of a sudden it kicks to one side, and you see, oh, hey, the winds are going that direction down there. you know,
Oh, wow.
so you can do that.
Little tricks of the
Yeah,
trade.
little tricks like that, you know. So, but you just try to keep track of, you know, which way it's going. And now we call it steerage. So when we talk about we had a lot of great steerage, that means that we were going west at one altitude level and we were going east at another. That's great steerage. A lot of days we don't have that. Sometimes it's, you know, we take off and it seems like no matter what we're doing, it doesn't change. I did a flight in Stowe, Vermont at the festival one year, and we had the ballooning club from, I believe it was Harvard or Yale was there, and I took one of their students with us, and we took off and we landed, and we actually climbed up to 3,000 feet. We were still looking straight down at our chase vehicle on the launch field, and we played for over an hour and a half, and we landed 20 feet from where we took off from. An hour and a half later, never went anywhere. It was absolutely dead calm, you know. So
wow, that means you never know what it's going to be like from one day to the next.
Absolutely.
James, speaking of that, what is it like
Sure.
for you as a balloon pilot and going up and, you know, 1 minute you're at 500 feet and the next you're at 6,000 and everything in between and things like that? What's that whole feeling like? You mentioned it earlier that you found it very enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love to just surf the treetops. That's what I call it, where you're just kind of brushing the very tops of the trees. And I play a game with myself, and as I've been doing my training with contour flying, I've been, you know, just kind of watching the trees, and I'll say, I'm going to touch that treetop, but I'm going to go over that one, and then I'm going to touch that one, you know, and that's kind of a game that I play with myself to just kind of have
Fast
that control.
and Furious in a balloon.
Yeah, Fast and Furious at 4 miles an hour. Yeah. But that's just kind of a game that I like to play. I like flying treetops too because you get to have conversations with folks on the ground. Everybody's there taking a picture. Your arm gets tired from waving. When your arm gets tired, that's when you go up to 3,000 feet and just enjoy the view. I had a great experience just a couple of weeks ago here. I got to see Lake Michigan from Kalamazoo. Now that's about 45 miles. Got a nice view of Lake Michigan from up here from about 3,200 feet. So it was a crystal clear day, just absolutely beautiful to be up. And that's something you don't get to see, you know, all the time. I mean, fixed wing you probably do, but
were you flying over the water or along the coast?
No, we were like I said, I was 45 miles inland from Kalamazoo. So I had just a really nice crystal clear day to be able to see that. I did wind up flying over a couple other inland lakes. Flew over, actually did my first
Splash and dash.
Splash and dash. Thanks. I couldn't think of the term. My first splash and dash that day. That was an experience, which is basically where you touch the surface of the water. You're supposed to just touch the surface of the water.
You're supposed to skim it and then go right back up.
Yeah, I went knee deep.
Okay.
I knew Tarp was waiting for that. I could see the look on his face.
Oh, been there, done that.
Yeah. I knew
found my Motorola radios laying in the bottom of the basket.
Yeah. Yep. I could see that happening for sure. I did that on one of my more aggressive landings, but no, I splash and dash. I pulled in and I was probably up to my knees in water, and I knew I was only in a couple of feet of water. So worst case scenario, I was just going to be standing still.
Were you able to pull back up from it?
I did. I burned pretty hard. In fact, I burned a little too hard, and I came out of there at about 750 feet per minute. So I was really accelerating.
Hit the panic button, huh?
Yeah, a little bit. Again, you know, just learning, but realized I didn't have to jump that quickly, but I did have a tree line I wanted to clear, and we always, you know, stay clear of power lines. So I wanted to make sure I was well clear of those, and I was. So it was the first time I ever really vented and burned at the same time, just trying to keep my top in. So
you make it sound, even with that, you make it sound fun. How about you, Mitch? What's some of your joy with having, you've been doing this for years and you sound like you love it as much now as you did years ago?
I think sharing the experience with people, young and old alike, is my greatest thrill. I mean, it is the oldest form of aviation, and I like to, you know, expand on that and let people know. And I enjoy taking people. We did a flight in Vermont one year, and we had a great grandmother, mom and daughter in the basket, and great grandma was well up into her 90s, and we took off, and we quite often we put a pie ball up. So we take a helium filled balloon and let it go, and we watch the balloon and see which way it's going and how fast it's going. Kind of give an idea of what will happen when we get the big balloon in the air. And it doesn't always hold true, but we took off on that flight, and all of a sudden we changed direction a little bit, went up over a mountain, and we were moving along a little bit faster than I would like to be with a 90-something-year-old person in my basket. But we were able to drop in past a tree line down into a meadow by a river, and we actually stalled from going about 8 miles an hour to the point where we backed up from the river. We reversed direction, did a beautiful landing in the field, and we had about 20 people following us in cars, 20 different carloads of people, and we just got everybody out and got everybody a ride. And all balloonists have a story to tell at the end of the flight when we do our champagne celebration to celebrate the flight. And it varies from balloonist to balloonist, and we talk about the history of ballooning, and we always say the balloonist prayer, which a lot of people say we should say before we fly, but we always say it
you say a thank you prayer.
Yeah, but it's more of a it's a gentle breezes thing. So you have to go on a balloon experience to hear that whole story, and like I said, every balloonist has his version, but I just like sharing the antiquity of the sport and the history of the sport, and try to get people more interested in looking at balloons, and they're beautiful. Like Albuquerque is the most photographed event in the world, I believe.
It has to be. Mitch, give us a little history. Tell us a little bit about because ballooning goes back a couple of 100 years minimum. So
it does.
So share that with us a little. We'll take a couple of minutes to do that.
Okay. All right. So it was in my story that I tell, I gather people around, and because we want everybody here. And as we're getting ready to open the champagne, we'll talk about the history, and we go back, and it was once penned by a gentleman back in England in the year 1850. And he wrote that the machine must be very large, wrought of copper or other fine metal, as thin as possible to be as light as possible. And it would be filled with a gas, and it would be released into the atmosphere where it would drift upon the winds as if a vessel upon the waters. And that was written by Roger Bacon in 1250. And he was kind of referred to as a sorcerer. And as far as we know, he was imprisoned and for whatever reasons back in those days. And so his writings were not discovered for another 500 years. I think I've seen some pictures of Leonardo da Vinci drawings that he had done of flying machines, but I don't think he ever did anything with them. But you get into the 1700s, and in France, there was a family called the Montgolfier family. And the Montgolfiers were in the paper business. They had 16 children, and 2 of the older children were quite innovative in wanting to learn and explore and do things new. And so they discovered that if they could capture smoke in fabric, they could cause the fabric to rise. Well, the earliest balloons were called smoke balloons for that reason, and they built their first smoke balloon, and they launched it out of the local park off from a platform they had built with a big hole in the middle of it, so they could build a fire underneath. And they burned old straw and old shoes, I suppose, and anything that would burn heavy black smoke, because they knew that smoke was going to cause this thing to fly. So it built up and got full, and they chopped the ropes, and it went a couple thousand feet into the air and flew off into the countryside. And by the time they got their horses and buggies together and got out to the farm fields, they realized that the farmers had destroyed it because they thought it was an evil demon coming from outer space to destroy their crops. So they went out and they destroyed the balloon. The Montgolfiers were a little put out because it got destroyed, but they were pretty happy that it flew. So the next thing they needed to do is figure out, geez, can somebody breathe up there? They knew that they could work on a church steeple or go up on a hillside and they could breathe, but they didn't know what it was like well above those points. So they decided they'd build a new envelope, and they built a carriage, a big wicker basket that had a hole in the middle of it. They could build a fire on the ground underneath, and they put a rooster, a duck, and a sheep in the basket. And they did the same process, chopped the ropes. This time they had the thing ready to go with all the buggies and horses, it flew up about 5,000 feet and flew about 20 minutes, and it landed again in a farm field. And the good news was all three animals were alive, except the rooster had a broken foot. Somebody said the sheep probably stepped on it when they were landing, but who knows, so,
Yeah.
but they were pretty excited.
That was
So
actually
now,
pretty smart back then.
yeah, they for the time, yes. So sorry. And so with that said, they decided, okay, now we need to fly a person. Well, there was a fellow in Paris that was experimenting with gas balloons, city gas balloons. And they recruited him, and he came out to the countryside, and they built a new balloon, and he did the first flight. They had talked about maybe getting a somebody from one of the local prisons, but that would quite a thing to bestow on somebody that probably wouldn't deserve it. So they got this gentleman to fly the balloon. And when he flew, he took wine with him that was vinted from the local region. So the farmers would recognize the wine. And when he landed, he would present the bottle of wine to the landowner, and thanking him and identifying that he was not from outer space, and they would celebrate the flight. So that's kind of the short history of it. The modern day ballooning, those were smoke balloons, and the smoke balloons flew well into the barnstorming days in the 20s. And they would do events at fairs where a guy would take off with a smoke balloon with a trapeze underneath and a parachute, and he would go up quite a distance and let go and let the balloon go fly, land somewhere, and they go retrieve it later. And so that smoke ballooning went away. Tarp can probably fill in more in the 50s when the modern day hot air balloon came into making.
Sure. Before we do that, though, let's talk about your grandfather and moving to that, what he did, and your family's involvement in aviation, because I think it's pretty interesting, your overall involvement in aviation, not just hot air ballooning.
Oh, well, sure. My grandfather worked in the industry, automotive industry and things, in the early 1900s, and he left the automotive world in the early 20s and went to work for Great Lakes Aircraft. And he was involved with the Cleveland Air Races, and that's where my mom and my Aunt Jane got a chance to meet Amelia Earhart. And my mom particularly got hooked on aviation and loved balloons. Loved balloons, but she loved aircraft, and she was only 10 years old at the time. So when she finished college, my grandfather, who was then working at Bell Aircraft, had offered her a reward and gave her an airplane, and so she got into flying in those days. She actually was working to be with the Wasps, and she was in the last training flight of the Wasps, had a medical issue, had to leave, and by the time she was ready to go back, they had scrapped the program. So, but she was a moving force for me when I was interested in my starting fixed wing, and she was the one that encouraged me to start flying airplanes back in the early 70s. And she always told me, you have to fly a lot and fly often, and if you can't fly, don't fly for a while, save up so you can fly a bunch, because, so
right, safety.
Yeah, for safety, so anyway, so that's kind of, and then I kind of passed that on to James and the boys, I guess.
Sure. So Tarp, you have anything to add to the history factor of the hot air balloon era?
Well, after like Mitch was talking about, the Montgolfiers came up with the paper balloon. That same year, Professor Charles came up with a rubberized fabric and filled it full of hydrogen and invented gas balloon. And that's what was used during the Civil War with Thaddeus Lowe, was a hydrogen balloon to survey the troops during the Civil War. In the barnstorming days, they were using heavy canvas and lighting fires underneath it, probably a kerosene fire, and going up and jumping out off the trapeze, parachuting. But ballooning kind of just faded out for a while until the early 60s, when a company called Raven Industries and a man named Ed Yost had a Navy contract to come up with some sort of pilot escape system for downed pilots, airplane pilots. And he put together modern day nylon, and which, the modern nylon only was invented World War II era for parachutes, and then put together propane, which hadn't been in wide production. So he came up with the first crewed hot air balloon in the 60s, and put all that together and flew the first modern day hot air balloon under a Navy contract.
Got you.
And,
You have flown over 2,600 hours in balloons. Anything stand out as a really fun or interesting story or experience that you've had flying balloons?
Most all of them are just, great experiences from, I've flown over the Alps in the wintertime in a hot air balloon. Just
Wow.
beautiful flights.
What altitude would that have been at?
We were flying at 15,000.
Okay.
We were.
So you had oxygen?
We had it on board, didn't need it. We really were jumping from one valley to the next, so we weren't
up there very long.
Okay. Then flying across the vineyards in Germany are beautiful. Flying in Albuquerque across the desert. There's just a lot of beautiful places in the world to see from above. And
what is the fastest any of you've experienced a hot air balloon going? I mean, we've been talking about 2 miles an hour, 8 miles an hour, and stuff like that. But what's a top speed? This is just the airplane side of me coming out. Sorry.
Well, I've personally been probably 100 miles an hour in one, but that was at 18,000 feet.
Right.
And it was calm on the ground when we landed, stand up landing.
Does your cat fly in your balloon with you?
No, not hardly.
Okay.
You need to be interviewing Don Edwards now. Don's got a dog that flies with him.
Oh, wow. I can believe that. How about you, Mitch? What's the fastest you've been?
I think when I went out and got my private rating in Belen, New Mexico, south of Albuquerque, we had a couple flights where we were doing up in the 30s, 30 mile an hour range. So that's about as fast. My fastest landing has been about 16. And keeping in mind that there's no wheels underneath a balloon basket,
Right. Wow. That's coming in at a pretty good clip.
Yeah. So that's what we call a lay down landing, So.
Okay. Gotcha.
You drag along, the basket drags along on its side, and you're hiding down in the bottom until all the dust is cleared.
Yep.
You don't want to land very fast in a hot air balloon.
I would think not. I would absolutely think not. We're running out of time, but there's a couple areas that I wanted to make sure we touched on. And one of them, you were talking, Tarp, a lot about competitions. And there are a lot of balloon competitions, apparently, some bigger than others. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and who gets involved in these? In other words, are there such things as professional balloonists that are in balloon races or whatever these competitions are?
Yeah, there's a whole segment of hot air ballooning that really does nothing but competition. And it's amazing to watch these guys. They can let pie balls off, read the wind, what the pie balls are doing. They'll look at their Ryan Carlton weather. They'll look at the FAA aviation weather, and they'll go out and generally a task in competition is go a couple of miles away and come back and throw a beanbag at an X. And it's gotten to where nowadays some of these competitions to where it'll look like somebody shot the center of the X with a shotgun. There's so many bags just have been peppered on top of the center of the X because these guys are playing the winds and they're just steering the balloon left and right by going up and down and doing a fantastic job of doing it. So yeah, there's a big contingent of ballooning that is competition oriented. There's another segment of ballooning that we touched on briefly, gas ballooning, to where you're flying with a captive. You've got an envelope that's full of either helium or hydrogen.
Right.
And basically the world championship just concluded over the weekend of that. It's actually the oldest aero race in the world, the Gordon Bennett.
Where was that, and how many people participated?
This year it was started in St. Gallen, Switzerland, which is just south of the Bodensee, in northern Switzerland, and they landed on the shores of the Black Sea in Romania and Bulgaria.
What was the distance?
The winning distance, I want to say, was 1,500 kilometers.
Okay. And how many people actually compete in a particular event like that, approximately?
They allow 3 teams in the Gordon Bennett. They allow 3 teams from each country.
Okay.
So there were, in this particular event, there were something like 20 teams.
Okay. Have you ever competed?
Yes.
Okay. Did you like it?
I do. I enjoy flying just for the fun of it, though.
Okay. How about you, James? Mitch. James, you're a student pilot, so I imagine not. But James, Mitch, have you ever competed?
No, not really. Other than at festivals where we get a bean bag, and if we have an opportunity, we have a hare and hound race. So one balloon will fly out ahead of the rest of the balloons. They'll land and they'll lay out this X, and then we will all launch 10 minutes later, and we try to navigate as closely as possible to that X and throw our bean bag with our number on it. So other than doing that, that's the closest to competition. And again, I enjoy the fun of the flight. So if the baggie doesn't even get dropped out of the envelope, out of the basket, I don't care.
So I just have fun with it. I have a quick question, a quick statement question. The quick question is, ground school or the written for hot air ballooning. Can somebody tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's very similar to the fixed wing. They have a private and a commercial, and the written for the private. In fact, when I took mine, it was supposed to be balloon oriented, but there were 8 questions that were VOR related. So fortunately, I had some fixed wing background, and I was able to weasel through that. So there's a written exam. Then we take you meet with a designated examiner, you do an oral exam, you do a physical flight test, and so that's all a part of getting your pilot's license, pilot certificate, and by the way, the aircraft are N numbered, just like the airplanes at the airport. We do have annual inspections that we go through, the whole bit, so.
Yeah, and the final thing I was going to say, it just sounds like meteorology is a major factor with ballooning, and you really become somewhat of a weather person in order for you to do it effectively. Would that be right?
Absolutely. We're highly weather dependent. Yes.
You were going to say something, Tarp?
I said, yeah, you should become a very good micrometeorologist.
Yep. Well said, guys. So as we kind of wrap up here, I'd like to give each of you a chance to just say a few words about the importance of hot air ballooning to you and what it means and what you think it should mean to those of us out there that may be interested, et cetera. I'll start with you, James.
Yeah. For me, I always say this: hot air ballooning means family. Tarp's a great example. His son JT was the youngest boy to ever solo. He did that at 8 years old, Tarp?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, thanks for bringing that up. I totally forgot to mention that.
Yeah. And for me, again, my boys are involved. My dad's involved. My fiance, we're pulling her into it and getting her more and more involved. And it really is a family event. And we're always happy to meet more people that are doing it. And we call that our ballooning family, we grow friends, and we just want to promote the sport. We absolutely love doing it. And we love to show people everything we can about it.
Yeah, sounds great. Tarp, tell us about your 8-year-old and then your comments too about the whole ballooning industry.
JT's always been interested in ballooning. And I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years ago when he was younger, he met a family. And James is talking about family. And there's ballooning families all over the world. And there's a family in Albuquerque, Troy and Tammy Bradley, who have a son, Bobby Bradley, who at the time, Bobby was 9, and Bobby set a world's record for the youngest pilot to ever solo in a hot air balloon. And at the Balloon Fest in Albuquerque, we were all visiting, and I told JT, I said, and JT was probably 5 at the time. And I told him, I said, Bobby flew when he was 9 years old. He's the youngest pilot ever. And he walked over to Bobby and looked up at him. He says, "I'm going to break your record."
And hey,
and
just so I stay out of trouble with the FAA, can you give us the criteria for flying solo at 8 years old?
Well, I had the FSDO call me and want to read me the Ride Act. He said, you can't solo until you're 14 years old. And I said, no. I said, this was an ultralight balloon, and ultralight aircraft don't require a pilot's license, or they don't require an aircraft license. And they're like, oh yeah, we've forgotten about that. So yeah, it was an ultralight balloon, and we had prepared him really well for years, doing computer simulations and tethering a small balloon, tethering a large balloon. It was a perfectly calm, still day. He flew for 20 minutes and probably went a mile at the most, went up to 400 or 500 feet, but he didn't go anywhere. We walked, my wife and I walked underneath the balloon the entire flight. So it was a really special day.
What are your thoughts about the industry going forward in the future of ballooning?
Well, ballooning in the last many years has become a graying sport. All of the enthusiasts that there were so many in the 80s and 90s have gotten old and either gotten out or getting out now. And there's quite a few young people coming in. I don't think there's as many as there used to be, but there's some new talent coming in and new interest coming in, and younger people in ballooning. So I see it sticking around for a long time. Regulations are getting tougher, and the airspace is going to get tighter. There's an NPRM that all of aviation needs to get behind, that may be too late to do anything, because I don't think we have the money to fight Amazon, that drones are going to get the right of way over all of us. Which I don't think
that's an interesting perspective. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, drones are going to have an unmanned aircraft is going to have the right of way over a manned aircraft. But I just parrot what James was saying about ballooning. It's a family affair. It's a social affair. I go to balloon events anymore to see my old friends and make new friends. It's been a wonderful part of my life, majority of my life, and have just blessed that I've been able to participate with it in it.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, Mitch, you the reason that I've even put this show together, and appreciate this opportunity of having you guys. So let you have some final words about ballooning and what it means to you, and what do you think it means to the future?
Well, it means a lot to me because, like Tarp said, that going to events, whether it's in Helen or in Albuquerque or a local small event in your neighborhood, is important, because you get to see your old friends and make new friends. And we try to bring new people into the fold every time, and we're pretty successful at it. And I'm hopeful that will continue on, and I look forward to a lot of great flights in the future, and getting my grandsons up. And with that said, it's been a joy working with you. I'm glad I met you in Oshkosh, and look forward to seeing you again down the road.
Yeah, well, you're going to see me find a place that I can go up in a balloon. That's definitely in my plans. I definitely want to, after talking with you guys about it and doing the research on it, I definitely want to have that experience. So it's a pilot bucket list thing, I guess I have to call it that. Listen, Mitch, James, Tarp, thank you very much for all of your insight and your enthusiasm, passion for ballooning, and really giving us an idea of how great of an aspect of the aviation industry it truly is. So I appreciate all you guys being with me today.
It's been our pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Vince.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Absolutely.
you so much. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Well, thanks everybody for watching All Things Aviation and Aerospace, a special edition with regard to hot air ballooning and all aspects of it, both the commercial and the non-commercial fun side of it. The family, that just sounds like aviation anyhow, but it sounds like it takes it to another level when it comes to ballooning. So I'm glad that you were able to join us. This will be available, of course, on demand, both on Facebook and YouTube, and as well as a audio only version for podcasts for you guys. So that'll be out in the next 24 to 48 hours. In the meantime, have a really great show next week. Going to be actually talking about aerobatic flying, the Aeroshell team, the entire team being on the show. So I'm looking forward to that as another great opportunity to talk about another aspect yet of aviation. Thanks again, everybody. Take care. Until next week, we'll catch you later.